Police found a notebook hidden behind the cabin wall, filled with names, sleep schedules, and one entry that just said, "Tonight." Someone had been living inside the wall, inches away from where the kids slept. Every single night, they found a crack in the wood, deliberately made, aimed directly at the bunks. He had been watching them for weeks. And on the last night, the door handle started turning, slowly, like someone who had done it before, like someone who knew, eventually, one of them would open it. These are 3 real summer camps, 3 real stories, and not one family was told the full truth. I was 15 this summer. I learned that a place can feel safe and still be dangerous. My parents signed me up for a sleepaway camp in Pennsylvania, one of those disconnect and make memories camps tucked into endless trees and narrow roads. The brochure showed smiling kids in canoes, counselors high-fiving by a lake, and cabins that looked rustic in a cute way. It wasn't a wilderness survival camp or anything extreme. It was the kind of place where you played capture the flag, did crafts, sang after dinner, and fell asleep to crickets. I didn't even want to go, but my mom called it confidence building, and my dad said it would help me get out of my head. So I went. 2 weeks, mid-July, the kind of summer heat that makes the air feel thick even in the shade. The camp was split into villages, with cabins arranged in rough circles. My group was called Pine Ridge, and our cabin was balsam, dark wood, metal roof, the smell of old campfires baked into the walls. Inside were 10 bunks, trunks lined up like little barricades, and a single ceiling fan that mostly just moved hot air around. Our counselors were Kayla and Brendan, both college-aged, both way too upbeat for 7 a.m. Kayla wore a whistle like it was part of her body. Brendan had that calm, friendly voice that made you want to trust him immediately. On the first night, Kayla laid down the rules. No food in the cabin. Bears, she said, tapping the side of her nose like we were in on a secret. Buddy system after dark. If you have to use the bathroom, you wait a counselor. And if you hear anything outside, she paused, smiled. It's probably a raccoon. Everyone laughed. It did feel like a joke. The camp had a security gate. The main lodge had cameras. There were lights along the main paths. Parents wouldn't send kids somewhere sketchy, right? I picked a bottom bunk near the back wall. No window beside it. Just a slab of wood and a row of hooks above it for towels. I like that. Windows freak me out at night. I'd always been like that. I like feeling hidden. The first few days were normal camp stuff. Swimming, volleyball, canoe practice. The lake was the camp's pride. Dark green water, ringed by pine trees, with a dock that creaked in a way that felt old and honest. At night we did campfire circle, and the counselors told silly ghost stories. Nothing scary. The kind where the monster ends up being a moose. Then on day 4, a storm rolled in. It started late afternoon, during archery. The air went still, and everything smelled like wet leaves even before the rain hit. When the first thunder cracked, Kayla clapped her hands and herded us back down the path. The rain came down hard, turning the ground into mud. By the time we reached Balsam Cabin, we were soaked and laughing and shivering. The storm knocked out power for maybe an hour. No lights, no fan, no charging phones. We weren't allowed phones anyway, but a couple girls had them hidden in their trunks, like contraband. Brendan checked on us twice, using a flashlight, the beam bouncing across faces like we were in a scary movie. Just the storm, he said, casual. All good. When the power came back, the cabin lights flickered on like nothing happened. Except something felt different after that storm. Like the camp had shifted slightly, like a door had opened somewhere and never fully closed again. That night, I couldn't sleep. The cabin was humid, and the ceiling fan made a soft clicking noise every time it rotated, like it was barely holding itself together. Someone near the front bunks was whispering. Someone else was snoring. There were always sounds. Camp is never truly quiet. But around 2 a.m., I heard something that didn't fit. A slow, deliberate tap. Not inside. Outside. At first I thought it was rain dripping from a branch onto the metal roof. Tap, tap, tap. But the rain was gone. The storm had moved on. The night was clear. I could hear the lake far away, the faint insect hum, and the cabin's own breathing. Then the tapping moved. It wasn't on the roof anymore. It sounded lower, like on the wall. Tap, tap, tap. I held my breath. Across the cabin, someone shifted. A bunk creaked. Then silence again. Tap, tap. It stopped. I stared into the darkness, eyes open wide, trying to convince myself it was a branch. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch. The cabin porch was wooden. You could tell when someone stepped on it. The boards complained. Normally, it would be a counselor doing a routine check, but counselors didn't walk like that. Counselors walked like people who didn't want to wake sleeping kids. Light, quick, purposeful. These footsteps were testing. Slow, weighty, almost like someone was trying not to make noise, but wasn't very good at it. One step, pause. Another step, pause. I stayed frozen, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I tried to listen for a voice, for the familiar jingle of keys, for Brendan's calm, "Hey guys," all good. Nothing, just the porch boards, and then a soft scrape, like something dragged along the wood. Then, right outside the cabin door, a click. The handle, not yanked, not rattled like a raccoon, turned. Carefully, I felt my skin go cold. The camp doors had those push-bar locks, and Kayla always made a show of checking them. Locked, she'd announce like a bedtime prayer. Locked meant safe. Locked meant nobody could just walk in. The handle turned again, and for half a second, the pressure against the door changed, like whoever was outside had leaned into it. Then it released. Silence. I lay there, eyes burning from not blinking, listening so hard it felt like my ears hurt. After maybe a minute, the footsteps retreated down the porch, slower than before, like whoever it was had all the time in the world. In the morning, I told myself I imagined it. I didn't tell anyone at breakfast. I didn't want to be the girl who freaks out. I didn't want Kayla to laugh and say raccoon, and everyone to look at me like I was fragile. That day, during lunch, I noticed something I hadn't noticed before. On the side of the cabin near the back wall, near my bunk, there was a narrow maintenance access panel. Just a rectangle of wood with screws. I'd seen it, but it never registered. And beneath it, in the dirt, were footprints. Not animal tracks, bare human footprints. They weren't deep, but you could see the shape, heel, arch, toes. Like someone stepped there after the rain, when the ground was still soft. They pointed toward the cabin wall, and then away. My stomach dropped. I didn't say anything. I just kept walking, pretending I hadn't noticed, like if I acted normal, the world would stay normal. That night, I made sure I had my water bottle, my shoes, my hoodie, everything within reach. I don't know why. I just did. At lights out, Kayla stood in the doorway and did her usual routine. "If you need anything, wake me," she said. "No one goes outside. Buddy system. We're safe." Safe. That word sounded different now. Around midnight, I finally drifted off. And then something woke me, so sudden it felt like I'd been yanked up by a string. Not a sound, a feeling. That heavy sensation of being watched. I opened my eyes. The cabin was mostly dark, except for a thin strip of moonlight leaking through a window near the front bunks. The air was still. Even the fan had stopped. Power flicker, maybe. I lay perfectly still, trying to hear. That's when I realized the watching feeling wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from behind me, from the wall, from the spot with the maintenance panel. My eyes drifted to the hooks above my bunk, towels, a hoodie, a bag. And right under the hooks, where the wall met the bunk frame, there was a narrow gap. Not big, just enough for air, for shadows. I stared at it, and the shadow in that gap shifted, like something moved on the other side. My throat tightened. I wanted to bolt up and scream, but my body didn't listen. It's a weird thing, fear. Sometimes it makes you loud. Sometimes it makes you a statue. Then, from the wall, right by my head, I heard a whisper. Not a voice I recognized. Not inside the cabin. It sounded pressed through wood. A breathy murmur, like someone speaking with their lips close to a crack. I couldn't make out the words, but it was human. I sat up so fast my bunk squealed. The sound sliced through the cabin. A few girls stirred. Someone groaned. "What?" I didn't answer. I swung my legs out, grabbed my shoes without putting them on, and practically crawled down the aisle toward the counselor's room. Kayla slept in a small side area separated by a half wall and curtain. I shoved the curtain aside, whispered shouting her name. "Kayla, Kayla." She blinked awake, instantly alert in that counselor way. "What's wrong?" "I heard someone," I said, voice shaking. "Outside, by the wall, by my bunk." Kayla grabbed her flashlight. Brendan was up too in seconds, pulling on shoes. They didn't laugh. They didn't say raccoon. Their faces changed in a way that made my blood run colder. Brendan whispered, Everyone stay in your bunks. But the cabin was already half awake, girls sitting up, whispering questions. Kayla stepped out onto the porch with the flashlight beam sweeping the ground. Brendan followed, keeping close. I stood in the doorway behind them, heart hammering. The yard was still. Trees stood like black columns. The moonlight made everything look flatter, wrong. Kayla shined the light along the cabin wall. And when the beam hit the dirt near the maintenance panel, she stopped. "Brendan," she said quietly. He stepped closer. I couldn't see what they saw at first. Then Kayla angled the beam. Fresh footprints, bare feet, more than one set. And right beside them, pressed into the damp earth, was something else. A rectangle shape, like someone had knelt, like someone had leaned close to the wall. Kayla turned her head toward me, and in that moment, she didn't look like a fun counselor anymore. She looked like a 20-something who suddenly remembered she was responsible for 10 sleeping kids in the woods. "Get everyone up," she said, quietly. "Shoes on. We're going to the lodge." Someone asked, "Is it a bear?" Kayla didn't answer. She just said, "Now." We moved in a rush of hushed chaos. Flashlights, shoelaces half-tied, kids stumbling in the dark. Brendan walked behind us on the path, scanning the trees like he expected something to step out. We made it to the lodge, and the night staff let us in. They called the director. The director called security. Security called the police. That part was a blur. What I remember clearly is sitting on a vinyl couch under bright fluorescent lights, feeling sick, while adults whispered in the office like they didn't want kids to hear. I remember Brendan crouching in front of me and saying, "You did the right thing. You're not in trouble." I remember Kayla holding my shoulder like she needed to ground herself as much as I did. And I remember the camp director, an older woman with a radio clipped to her belt, saying quietly to another staff member, "Check the storage crawl space behind Balsam." Crawl space, behind our cabin. The next morning, we were told we weren't going back to the cabin for maintenance. We were moved to a cabin closer to the lodge. A better cabin, they said, like a prize. No one said the word police. No one said intruder. But the whole camp felt like it had its breath held. Later that afternoon, I overheard something I probably wasn't supposed to. 2 kitchen staff talking near the back door, voices low. "One of the grounds guys found the panel screws loosened," one said. "Again," the other replied. "Again." That word hit me like a punch. I didn't stay for the rest of the session. My parents drove up the next day. The camp called it homesickness. My mom hugged me too tight, like she'd been crying. My dad kept asking staff questions with that polite anger adults do when they're trying not to explode. In the car ride home, my mom finally said, "They didn't want to scare the other families." "What happened?" I asked. She looked out the window for a long time before answering. "They said someone had been using the crawl space behind the cabin," she said. "Like someone who wasn't supposed to be there. And they found signs." "What signs?" She swallowed. "Food wrappers, a cheap flashlight, a blanket, and little notes." "What kind of notes?" My mom didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Notes about the girls, about schedules, who showers when, who wakes up at night." My mouth went dry. I stared at the trees whipping by on the highway and realized something that made me feel hollow. I had chosen the bunk with no window because it felt safest, and it turned out that was exactly why it was the worst spot in the cabin. For years after, I couldn't sleep with my bed against a wall. I couldn't sleep in rooms with hidden panels or attic doors. I checked locks twice, 3 times, sometimes more. And every once in a while, when summer storms roll in and the house goes quiet after the rain, I remember that slow, careful click of the cabin door handle. And I wonder how long someone had been out there, listening to us breathe before I finally sat up. Story 2. The counselor who never slept. I worked at Camp Alder Creek this summer after my freshman year of college. It sat deep in northern Michigan, about 40 minutes from the nearest real town. The kind of place where GPS stopped working halfway down the dirt access road, and the only signal you got was near the waterfront flagpole if you held your phone high enough. I wasn't a camper anymore. I was staff. And honestly, that made it feel safer. Staff had cabins closer to administration, radios clipped to our belts, nightly check-ins, background checks, all the things parents liked hearing about. I was assigned as a junior counselor for the 13 to 14 boys group. 12 kids, 1 senior counselor named Matt, and me. That was the reason I felt relaxed at first. He was 26, older than most counselors, former military according to camp gossip. Calm guy, never raised his voice. Kids listened to him instantly. Directors trusted him enough to give him overnight supervision shifts when storms rolled in. If something went wrong, Matt was the guy they called. The first week went perfectly normal. Wake-up whistle at 7:30. Breakfast chaos. Canoeing rotations. Archery. Evening games. Lights out by 10:30. Typical summer camp rhythm where days blur together until time barely feels real. But one thing about Matt stood out almost immediately. He never seemed tired. At camp, everyone gets exhausted. You're running around all day, dealing with homesick kids, late-night noise complaints, early mornings. Even the most energetic counselors start dragging by week 2. Matt didn't. Ever. No matter when I woke up during the night, he was awake. The first time I noticed was during a thunderstorm about 10 days in. Lightning cracked loud enough to wake half the cabin. One kid started crying. Another thought a tree fell nearby. I rolled out of my bunk, expecting chaos. But Matt was already sitting upright at the cabin door, not moving, just watching outside. Lightning flashed behind him, turning him into a silhouette. "You good?" I asked quietly. He didn't turn right away. After a second he said, "Yeah, just keeping watch." Keeping watch. That phrasing stuck with me, but I figured maybe military habits die hard. Still, something about it felt off. Over the next few nights, I started noticing patterns. Matt would volunteer for perimeter walks long after lights out, even when it wasn't his shift. Sometimes I'd wake up around 2 or 3 a.m. and his bunk would be empty. Then I'd hear the cabin door open slowly. He'd come back inside without turning lights on. Always quiet, always careful. One night, I checked the time, 3:17 a.m. Another night, 3:21, almost the same every time. At first I thought maybe he smoked secretly or just liked walking, until one camper mentioned something strange. His name was Tyler, quiet kid, super observant. During lunch he leaned toward me and whispered, "Does Matt check on us at night?" "Yeah," I said casually. "Counselors do rounds." Tyler shook his head slowly. "No, I mean like really close." I frowned. "What do you mean?" Tyler hesitated like he wasn't sure he should say it. "I woke up last night," he said, "and he was standing next to my bunk." That didn't sound alarming yet. Counselors sometimes checked breathing if kids were sick or homesick. But Tyler added something that made my stomach tighten. He didn't know I was awake. I laughed it off, probably making sure everyone's okay. Tyler didn't laugh back. He was just staring. That night, I couldn't sleep. The woods around Alder Creek got unbelievably dark after midnight. No city glow, no traffic noise, just wind moving through trees and the occasional splash from the lake. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement again, slow footsteps across the cabin floor. I kept my eyes closed. Through barely opened eyelids, I saw Matt moving between bunks. No flashlight, just moonlight coming through the windows. He stopped beside one camper, leaned slightly forward, and stayed there. Too long, way too long, maybe 30 seconds, maybe more. Then he moved to another bunk. Same thing, standing, watching. My chest felt tight. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe he counted heads. Maybe this was standard procedure somewhere. Then Matt stopped beside my bunk. I forced myself not to move. I could feel him there. You know that feeling when someone's presence changes the air around you? It felt like that. Seconds passed. Then I heard him whisper something so quietly I almost thought I imagined it. "They sleep so deeply here." My heart slammed against my ribs. A moment later, he walked back to the door and slipped outside again. I sat up immediately once he left. The cabin suddenly felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but watched. The next morning, I mentioned it casually to another counselor during breakfast, Emily from the girls' cabins. She stopped eating. "You noticed it too?" she asked. That's when my stomach really dropped. Emily told me Matt volunteered for extra patrols around multiple cabin areas, not just ours. Staff assumed he was being helpful, but a few counselors had woken up and seen him near cabins that weren't even his responsibility. Administration brushed it off. Reliable staff were hard to find, and Matt was reliable. 3 nights later, everything changed. It was staff movie night, meaning older campers were supervised at the main lodge while younger cabins slept early. Around midnight, I realized one of our campers, Jason, was missing from his bunk. Bathroom trips happened, so I waited a minute. 5 minutes passed. 10. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The camp paths were empty. Then I heard voices near the maintenance trail leading toward the old equipment sheds, and area campers weren't allowed near after dark. One voice was Jason's, the other, Matt's. I moved closer quietly. Jason sounded confused. I thought we were going fishing. Fishing? At midnight. Matt's voice stayed calm, almost soothing. Just a quick walk. Don't wake the others. Every alarm bell in my body went off. I stepped out and called, louder than I meant to. Matt? Both of them turned instantly. Jason looked relieved. Matt didn't look surprised. He just stared at me for a second, expression completely blank. Then he smiled. "Oh," he said casually. "Kid couldn't sleep." I walked straight over and put a hand on Jason's shoulder. "Head back to the cabin," I told him. Jason ran ahead without hesitation. Matt watched him go. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he said quietly, "You shouldn't interrupt trust-building moments." That sentence made my skin crawl. The next morning, administration pulled Matt aside after I reported it. By afternoon, he was gone. We were told there had been a policy disagreement. No details. Camp continued like nothing happened. But 2 sheriff vehicles arrived that evening. And later that night, the camp director gathered staff privately. Apparently, background checks had missed something. Matt had previously been removed from another youth program investigation years earlier. Nothing officially proven, just enough concern that he wasn't supposed to supervise minors alone. Someone at hiring hadn't followed up properly. The worst part? Security logs showed Matt walking campgrounds almost every night between 3 o'clock and 4 a.m. near sleeping cabins. For weeks. Jason later told me Matt had whispered through the cabin window telling him they were going on a special counselor adventure. If I hadn't woken up, if Jason had followed him deeper into those woods. I honestly don't like finishing that thought. The camp added stricter rules after that summer. Dual supervision, locked cabin checks, overnight cameras near paths. Parents never heard the full story. Most campers probably forgot, but I didn't, because sometimes I still wake up around 3:20 a.m. for no reason at all, and for a split second, I expect to see someone standing quietly at the foot of my bed, watching. I almost didn't go back to summer camp after what happened when I was 13, but the following year my parents convinced me to try again, saying lightning doesn't strike twice. Different camp, different state, different people. They chose Camp Lake Everett in upstate New York because it had excellent reviews and 30 years of operation without serious incidents. That phrase always sounds comforting, until you realize it only means nothing official ever happened. Lake Everett was bigger than any camp I'd seen before. Hundreds of acres of forest wrapped around a long black lake that looked beautiful during the day, but strangely dark at night. The water reflected almost nothing after sunset, like it swallowed light instead of bouncing it back. Our cabin sat farther from the main lodge than most. Counselors joked we were the wilderness group. 10 campers, 2 counselors, 1 narrow dirt trail connecting us to the rest of camp. The first week passed normally. Canoeing, climbing wall, night games. Everyone bonded fast. Camps do that to people. You feel like you've known strangers forever after only a few days. But there was one rule repeated more than any other. Never leave cabins after lights out. Not even for dares. Not even together. If you needed the bathroom, you woke a counselor. They said it was because kids sometimes got lost in the woods. At 13, that sounded reasonable. Until the noises started. Around the 5th night, someone heard footsteps outside the cabin after midnight. Heavy ones. Not animal movement. Actual walking. Our counselor Rachel checked outside with a flashlight and came back saying it was probably a deer. Everyone laughed and went back to sleep. But the footsteps came again the next night. And the next. Always late. Always circling the cabin slowly. Crunch, pause, crunch. Like someone pacing. By night 7, none of us were sleeping well. One kid swore he heard breathing outside the wall near his bunk. Another said something brushed against the window screen. Counselors kept reassuring us. Animals, wind, forest sounds. Except forests don't walk in perfect circles. The turning point happened during Capture the Flag night. It was the biggest event of the session. Campers running through marked forest areas with glow sticks. Counselors hiding as referees. Controlled chaos. During the game, one girl from another cabin went missing for nearly 20 minutes. When she came back, she was shaking so badly staff ended the activity early. Rumors spread instantly among campers. She said someone had followed her off the trail. Not a counselor, not a camper. Someone tall who disappeared when lights came toward them. Administration shut the rumor down fast. Imagination, they said, but security patrols quietly increased after that. And that's when things got worse for our cabin. 3 nights later, I woke up needing the bathroom. I almost ignored it, but eventually climbed down from my bunk and woke Rachel like we were supposed to. She grabbed her flashlight, half asleep, and walked me toward the bathroom building about 50 yards away. The woods were silent. Too silent. Even insects seemed gone. Halfway there, Rachel suddenly stopped walking. Her flashlight beam froze on something ahead near the tree line. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then I realized. Someone was standing between the trees. Perfectly still. Tall shape. Shoulders visible. Head tilted slightly. Rachel immediately pulled me behind her. "Hello," she called firmly. No response. The flashlight beam shook slightly as she adjusted it. The figure stepped backward into darkness and disappeared. Rachel grabbed my arm. "We're going back," she said quickly. No bathroom trip. Straight back to cabin. She locked the door behind us, a thing counselors almost never did, and stayed awake the rest of the night. The next morning, staff meetings ran longer than usual. Camp directors drove around in utility carts checking trails. Nobody explained anything, but counselors looked nervous now. That night was the final night of session. Campfire ceremony, songs, awards, kids crying because camp friendships always feel permanent when you're young. Everyone went to bed late. Around 1:30 a.m., I woke again. At first I thought it was thunder. Then I realized it was knocking. Slow, deliberate, coming from the cabin door. Knock, pause, knock. Every bunk went silent. Someone whispered, "Rachel." But Rachel was already sitting up. She didn't move toward the door. Another knock came, harder this time. Then a voice. Low, male, barely above a whisper. "Camp check." None of us moved, because counselors never said that. Rachel's voice came out sharp and controlled. Administration checks happened during daylight. Silence followed. Then the handle moved. The door rattled once. Locked. A long pause stretched across the cabin. And then footsteps moved along the porch, past the windows. Slowly, one camper started crying quietly. We heard movement near the back wall, then scratching, like fingernails dragging across wood. Someone outside was feeling along the cabin, searching. Minutes passed that felt endless. Finally, the sounds faded into the woods. Nobody slept again. At sunrise, security and local police arrived. Real police this time. We were kept inside cabins while adults searched the surrounding forest. Around noon, parents started arriving early for pickup, earlier than scheduled. Something was clearly wrong. While loading bags into my parents' car, I overheard 2 staff members talking near the lodge. One said quietly, they found where he'd been staying. The other asked, how long? The answer still gives me chills. Looks like weeks. Later, my mom told me what camp officials eventually admitted privately to families. A man had been living in abandoned maintenance tunnels near the far cabins. Former seasonal worker, fired years earlier. He knew patrol routes, knew schedules, knew which cabins were farthest from supervision. Police found food supplies, stolen camp maps, and notebooks. Pages filled with cabin numbers, descriptions of campers, sleep schedules, and marks next to certain nights. The scariest detail? On the final night, the night he knocked on our door, officers found fresh footprints leading directly to our cabin, and another set heading deeper into the woods, as if something interrupted him before he tried again. Camp Lake Everett closed permanently 2 summers later. Official reason was financial problems, but everyone who was there knows that wasn't the real reason. Even now, years later, I still think about how calm that voice sounded outside the door. Not angry, not rushed, patient, like someone who believed eventually one of us would open it.